My name is Margaret Harris, and I am 67 years old living in Madison, Wisconsin. I was an elementary school teacher for 35 years. I love children, love the way they see the world with curious, innocent eyes, until the day the children I loved most, my own 3 grandchildren, spoke to me with disdain. It all began with a phone call. That morning, I was watering my tomato vines on the porch when the phone rang. The screen showed the name I least wanted to see, Samantha, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was cold and brisk. "Mom, I'm going to Miami next week. There's a conference and a few parties. You're free, right? Watch the kids for me, okay?" I hesitated. "Next week? I still have to go for a checkup," and she cut me off sharply. "You don't do anything anyway except sit around the house. You should help." A chill sliced through that May morning. I heard every word clearly. You don't do anything. Words that stung like a blade. People think that when you're old, you get used to being disregarded. But no. Some words still make your heart sink, like the first time you were ever insulted. I gripped the phone tightly, then smiled, a smile I was sure Samantha couldn't detect. "All right, dear," I replied softly. "Bring the kids over. I'll watch them. In my own way." At that moment, I didn't know that a small decision would change my family forever. If you've ever been looked down upon or watched someone silently endure mistreatment just because they're kind, stay with me. This story will inspire you to believe that patience, love, and respect can truly transform a home. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next part, where I begin my journey of babysitting to teach my daughter-in-law a lesson, will keep you glued to the screen. I set the phone down and walked into the house to make myself a cup of tea. In the rising steam, I saw a reflection of my younger self, a slim woman with dark hair, standing in a small classroom with a chalkboard and rows of eager faces. I had spent my whole life teaching others how to love, respect, and listen to one another. And yet, at the end of my life, I found myself having to relearn those lessons from my own daughter-in-law. I sat down, opened the old notebook I once used for lesson plans, and wrote a single line: plan for next week, babysit, and teach the very first lesson, respect. I began teaching at the age of 22 in a small elementary school in the heart of Madison. From that day until I retired, the sounds of chalk dust, school bells, and children's laughter were the most familiar in my life. 35 years. I watched hundreds of children grow up, learning to write, learning to say, "I'm sorry" and "thank you." But none of those lessons prepared me for someone like Samantha, my own daughter-in-law. My life had once been peaceful, until I was 32 when my husband, Tom, died in a chain reaction car crash on the highway. People say time heals all wounds, but they forget. For a mother, worry replaces pain much faster than healing ever does. I still had David, my 3-year-old son, with curly brown hair and eyes just as sad as his father's. After that, I worked myself to the point of exhaustion. I taught classes during the day and tutored neighborhood kids in the evenings. There were days when I could only afford one meal, and of course, that meal was David's. I'll never forget one Christmas when he was 8. I sold the only necklace my mother had left me so I could buy him a second-hand bicycle. And me? I just sat watching him ride circles around the yard, his laughter floating through the cold air. And somehow, even with frozen hands, my heart felt warm. When David grew older, I thought, at least all those hardships meant something. He studied hard, got into the University of Wisconsin, and later became an engineer. The day he brought home a girl named Samantha, with a sweet smile, sparkling eyes, and honeyed words, I believed she was life's way of repaying my son. "She's kind and grateful, Mom," David said. And I believed him. At the wedding, Samantha hugged me and whispered, "I truly admire you. A strong woman who raised her son alone. I hope I can learn from you." I cried. That embrace, after so many lonely years, made me believe I was about to gain a daughter, but only a few years later I realized that hug had been the prelude to a symphony of deception. Everything changed slowly, subtly, like water dripping in one spot until it wears down the stone. It began with gentle teasing. It's such a shame David didn't have a father figure growing up. He missed out on a strong male role model. Then came the condescending advice. "Mom, nobody bakes these days. I only buy from organic bakeries." Gradually, Samantha began to separate David from me, little by little, with sweet words, tears, and endless, busy schedules. The day I brought a handmade wool blanket to the hospital for my first grandchild, she glanced at it and said, "Thanks, Mom, but we've already bought everything top quality. Maybe this can be a keepsake." A keepsake. That was when I understood. To Samantha, simplicity was pitiful and sincerity was contemptible. I didn't argue, because I was afraid of losing my son. I thought that if I stayed silent, one day David would see. But the silence of a kind person never stops a cruel one. It only convinces them they're right. The breaking point came on my 50th birthday, a dinner with no son and no grandchildren. Samantha texted me, "Sorry, Mom, we have an important dinner with clients tonight. I'll send flowers instead." The bouquet was beautiful, but it couldn't fill the emptiness at the long table, where it was just me, a small cake, and a card signed only by the florist. I sat there for a long time, watching the candles burn down, and I realized sometimes a woman only becomes strong when she has nothing left to lose. So that morning, when Samantha said, "You don't do anything anyway," I didn't feel hurt. I felt an opportunity to teach her and my 3 grandchildren the lesson she had never learned. Respect is the foundation of all love. After Samantha hung up, I sat still for a long while, listening to the ticking clock, each sound like a countdown to a plan that even I didn't yet know how to begin. Outside, a light rain was falling. The raindrops slid down the glass window, reflecting my face, tired, aged, but no longer weak. The words, "You don't do anything," kept replaying in my mind like a harsh tune on loop. She had no idea that I had done far more in my life than she could ever imagine. I taught illiterate children how to read, taught troubled kids how to be decent people, and raised my own son to grow up surrounded by love, even without a father. She didn't know, and probably never cared to. I took a sip of tea and opened my old notebook. On the first page, I wrote in bold letters, Lesson 1, no one has the right to call kindness useless. That evening, I called Evelyn, my longtime friend and fellow teacher. Evelyn had gone through a cunning, bitter divorce, and she was the kind of practical woman who could make anyone cautious around her. Her voice was still warm, just as I remembered. "Margaret, I can tell by your voice something's up. What did your daughter-in-law do this time?" I told her everything, every word, every tone. Evelyn was silent for a moment, then said, "All right, you want to teach her a lesson? Don't make it about emotion. Use your mind. You've got a teacher's memory. I've got the experience of being deceived, and my sister works for Child Protective Services. What do you say we put together a little test for your dear daughter-in-law?" I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt my heart beat faster, from excitement, not anger. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was about to reclaim my place in this family, not as someone to be ordered around, but as someone who teaches. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the rain, thinking about the 3 children. None of this was their fault. I remembered the rare times I saw them, their cold stares, their arrogant tone, the way they turned away when I reached out my hand. I once blamed it on the modern age, but now I knew it was the result of a warped kind of upbringing, one shaped by a mother who disdained her own roots. I wondered, If Samantha could make them forget I once held them in my arms, could I, with love and patience, make them remember? The answer came from deep within me. I have to try. The next morning, I called Evelyn. Eve, I need a few things. 3 small recording devices, 1 hidden camera, and if possible, a strong cup of coffee. She chuckled. You sound like you're preparing for a special lecture. No, I said, this is a practical session, and this time, my students are my own family. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store and bought cans of paint, boxes of cookies, milk, and colored paper. I wanted the house to feel warm and welcoming when the kids arrived. I wasn't planning to become a warden. I was going to be the old teacher giving her final lesson, one about love, discipline, and respect. By dusk, I tidied up the living room. Everything was neat, peaceful. I looked around the house, remembering each corner. The spot where David learned to write, the chair where Tom used to read the newspaper, the window where I used to wait for my son to come home from school. Now, all of it would become the stage for the last lesson I would ever teach. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and settled into my old armchair. In my mind, I pictured Samantha, her proud eyes, her cold smile, and the 3 children standing beside her, phones in hand, not even glancing at their grandmother. Quietly, I said to myself, she says I don't do anything, but tomorrow she'll learn that when a retired teacher decides to teach again, no one in her class gets to skip. Exactly at 7 o'clock the next morning, the doorbell rang. Not early, not late. Samantha was always punctual when it was her business. I opened the door. On the porch stood the 3 children lined up like passengers forced onto a train they didn't want to board. Ethan, 12 years old, tall and lanky, eyes glued to his phone. Lily, 10, arms crossed, face scrunched like she'd just smelled something foul. And Noah, 7, wide-eyed, clutching a backpack bigger than himself. Samantha stood behind them, suitcase in hand, speaking fast like she was reading a flight announcement. Ethan's allergic to dust, Lily doesn't eat vegetables, and Noah can only sleep with his iPad on. Their meds are in the green bag. And please don't give them greasy food like last time, okay? Last time? I asked softly. She looked at me and smirked. You forgot already? Well, that's understandable. Old people forget things. Anyway, I have to go or I'll miss my flight. She bent down, not to kiss the kids, but to mutter, be good, okay? None of them answered. I stood there watching her disappear beyond the gate, then turned around. 3 small faces, 3 pairs of cold eyes. The house fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Come on in, kids, I said gently. I have cookies and fresh milk. Ethan shrugged. Mom said not to eat anything you make. Lily added, she said your cooking's bad. It makes people sick. Noah murmured without looking up. I want to watch YouTube. I smiled. Calm, like a teacher listening to a wrong answer on the first day of class. That's all right. I won't force anyone, but here, everyone has a job to do. That's the first rule of this house. What job? Lily asked, defiant. Eat breakfast, make your bed, wash your hands, and learn how to say thank you. Ethan laughed. This isn't school, Grandma. Maybe not, I replied, but I was a teacher. And that habit's hard to break. He rolled his eyes and walked away. Lily dragged her suitcase upstairs. Noah sat on the floor, sniffling. I want to go home. It's boring here. I sat beside him and spoke softly. Noah, when your dad was your age, we didn't have a TV or Wi-Fi in this house, but we had something precious you won't find on an iPad. He looked at me, eyes still wet. What's that? Human warmth. He was quiet. Maybe he didn't understand, but I saw a flicker of softness in his eyes. By noon, the house smelled of food. I made vegetable soup and garlic butter toast, David's favorite meal. The children looked at the plates like they were staring at a complex math problem. I don't eat vegetables, Lily repeated. I sat down, scooped myself a bowl, and began eating slowly. Then you don't have to. But in this house, if you don't eat, you'll be hungry, and I don't cook another meal. 10 minutes later, the faint sound of spoons touching bowls filled the room. Noah was the first to eat, then Ethan, then Lily. No one spoke, but the furtive glances they cast my way were enough to make me smile. Later that afternoon, when they went upstairs, I quietly unplugged the Wi-Fi modem and hid it. A few minutes later, Ethan shouted, "Grandma, the Wi-Fi's gone." "Yes," I said calmly. "Probably the rain messed it up, but we have a whole world to explore without it." "What can we do without internet?" "Listen to the rain, talk, or help me bake cookies." No one replied, but later that evening, when the rain stopped, Noah came down to the kitchen and pulled up a chair beside me. "Grandma, are there any cookies left from this morning?" I nodded. "Can I have one, but don't tell my brother and sister?" I handed him a cookie, and for the first time that day, a smile spread across his little face. In that small kitchen, the sound of his crisp chewing filled the silence, a silence warmer than words, and I thought to myself, the wall Samantha built between me and my grandchildren had finally cracked, and sometimes all it takes is a single crack for the light to find its way in. The first 3 days passed slowly. The kids gradually got used to a rhythm without Wi-Fi, without fast food, without iPads at bedtime. The house was tranquil, only the scratch of pens and the faint scent of baked goods in the air. I didn't rush. As a teacher, I understood. To change a soul, you must be more patient than the one who sows the seeds. And sometimes a seed only sprouts after the first strike of lightning. That evening, after putting Noah to bed, I saw Ethan sitting on the porch, his face showing anxiety. He was trying to connect to the Wi-Fi with the phone I thought I had confiscated. I walked over quietly and said, "It's late, dear. The signal is weak out here." Ethan jumped and hid the phone behind his back. I was just checking my homework." "What homework?" "Gym homework," he mumbled. The answer nearly made me laugh, but I kept my voice stern. "I'm not forbidding you from contacting your mother. I only ask that you be honest. Secrets sooner or later cause hurt." The boy didn't speak, just bowed his head. When Ethan came back inside, the phone slipped from his hand. The screen lit up, showing a new notification. "Eric, after the Miami trip, we'll start phase 2. I stood frozen. "Eric?" I picked up the phone and hesitantly opened the screen. There was no password. Children are often careless. In the messages, lines struck me like knives. "Samantha, he signed the papers, stupid fool. The house is in my name now." "Eric, good. Once you get the insurance money and his savings, we'll have enough to go to Miami." "Samantha, I'll say the old lady is confused and signed by mistake." "Eric, what about the kids?" "Samantha, leave them with her for now. When the divorce is final, I'll take them away. Michael won't dare fight for custody." My hands trembled, not with anger, but with pain. Every word in that conversation spat on everything I believed in. Kindness, family, love. Samantha hadn't just betrayed my son. She was plotting to destroy the future of those innocent children. I took a deep breath, photographed each message, and sent them to Evelyn. "We need stronger evidence," I texted. Her reply came in less than a minute. "Don't rush. Let her get more confident. When she thinks she's won, that's when we act." I turned off the screen and set the phone on the table. I had no intention of telling the children yet. They weren't ready to know that the mother they admired was laying a trap for the whole family. That night, Lily came down to the kitchen for water. Seeing me still awake, she hesitated. "Grandma, why don't you hate my mom?" I looked up, meeting the child's eyes as clear as David's used to be. "I don't hate her, but sometimes, to protect those we love, we must face the truth." "Do you think my mom is wrong?" I gave a sad smile. "I think your mom has forgotten the most important thing. People can lie for money, but they can't buy back love that's already been lost." The girl was silent for a long time, then whispered, "I remember when Mom used to laugh a lot. Now she never really laughs anymore." When Lily went upstairs, I sat alone, staring at the faintly glowing phone. Outside, the night wind moved through the window, carrying the scent of damp earth, the smell of change. I knew this battle was no longer just between Samantha and me. It was a fight to reclaim the family's soul, and I, the one called useless, was ready for the next lesson. I waited until Friday afternoon, the day David usually finished work early, before calling my son home. I didn't want to ruin his marriage with a cold, impersonal phone call. The truth needed to be faced with eyes, not a message. When David walked in, I recognized the boy from years ago still living somewhere inside this 35-year-old man. Fatigue lined his face, his tie was crooked, and his smile was forced. "I'll only stay a little while, Mom. Samantha's got a client party. I have to pick her up later." I nodded, invited him to sit, and pushed Ethan's phone toward him. "Read it." David frowned, about to ask, but I only said softly, "Read it all, and then speak." Silence fell, broken only by the ticking clock. I watched my son's face as he read each line of the messages between Samantha and Eric. First a frown, then a furrowed brow, then a pallor. When he reached the line, "The house is in my name now," his hand trembled, and the phone clattered onto the wooden table. "No way!" David's voice was hoarse. "Do you know Eric?" I asked. "The new manager at Samantha's company." "Mom." "Where did you get this?" "From Ethan's phone." I didn't want to believe it either, but truth doesn't wait for belief to exist. David stood and walked a few paceless steps around the room like someone disoriented. "My God, all these years I thought she loved me for real. You know, I worked myself to the bone so she wouldn't have to worry. I thought I was protecting the family." I looked at my son and saw a man breaking apart. "David," I said gently, "sometimes we protect the wrong person, but we can still save the right ones." He sank into a chair and buried his hands in his hair. "Mom, how can she be so cruel?" "Because she has forgotten the true value of love. And you, if you give in to anger alone now, you will forget it too." I told David everything about Samantha's plan, the insurance money, the house, the scheme to take the children. He said nothing, only stared out the window where Ethan was kicking a ball with Noah and Lily was drawing on the steps. "Mom," he said softly, "I left the kids to themselves. I didn't know what I was losing until I saw them here." I put my hand on my son's shoulder and lowered my voice. "No one is a perfect father, but today you have a chance to start over." "What should I do?" "First, stay calm. Evelyn has helped me prepare the paperwork. You won't seek revenge. You will protect. That is how good people win." David nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. For the first time in many years, I watched him cry like a child, not from weakness, but from rediscovering the part of himself buried under responsibilities and fear. That evening, while I cooked dinner, David went out to the yard to play with the 3 children. I heard laughter drifting through the window, laughter this house had forgotten too long. Ethan fumbled a kick. Lily teased, "Dad, you're terrible." David laughed and wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. The late sunlight gilded their hair, and I understood. The family was slowly coming home. At dinner, David leaned toward me and whispered, "Mom, thank you for not choosing hatred." I answered, "I chose love because it's the only thing left when everything else falls apart." That night, I opened my notebook and wrote another line. Lesson 2. Truth can hurt, but silence kills love faster. Since the day David arrived, the house has undergone a complete transformation. There were no more lonely sighs in the morning, no more meals filled with silence and emptiness. Instead came the sounds of running feet, laughter tangled with arguments, chaotic but alive. David called this phase Project Respect. I didn't object. I simply added a small note beneath the sign taped to the fridge. Respecting others begins with respecting yourself. Every morning, the family woke up at 7. I brewed tea, David made coffee, and the children set the table themselves. Ethan learned to fry eggs without exploding the pan, Lily neatly arranged the dishes, and Noah proudly poured milk without spilling a drop. They were learning to live within rules, not because they were forced to, but because they were beginning to understand the meaning of togetherness. At noon, I taught them how to cook, draw, and garden. They got messy, dirty, but laughed more than ever. One day, Ethan asked, "Grandma, how come you're always so patient?" I replied, "Because it took me years to understand that shouting never makes anyone better. Only love, with clear boundaries, can do that." In the afternoons, David spent time talking to each child separately. For the first time, I saw him truly listening, really listening. One evening, I overheard him tell Ethan softly, "I'm sorry for making you grow up on your own." And Ethan, once so distant, simply said, "It's okay, Dad. Grandma taught me. Anyone can start over." I turned away so they wouldn't see my tears. On the 8th day, the whole family baked apple pies together. Lily covered the table with flour, Noah sang offbeat, David clumsily sliced apples, and I stood watching, my heart overflowing with a feeling I once thought I'd lost: peace. By the 10th day, the children no longer asked, "When is Mom coming back?" They started calling this house home, not Grandma's place. One night, Lily whispered to me as I tucked Noah into bed, "Grandma, I think, here, I'm not scared to make mistakes, but if Mom knew, she'd yell." I stroked her hair and said softly, "Here, if you make a mistake, I'll teach you. No one is born perfect, but everyone can learn to be kind." She nodded, wrapped her arms around me, and murmured, "You smell like cookies." I laughed through my tears. Sometimes love returns in the simplest, most innocent words. On the 13th day, Evelyn called. "The police and the lawyer have finished the paperwork, Margaret. Now we just wait for her to come back." I thanked her, then looked out at the garden. David was teaching Noah how to water the plants, while Ethan helped Lily place little name tags on each vegetable row: hope, patience, family. I realized we had replanted the seeds of a home. That evening, David sat with me on the porch, silently watching the sunset. He said quietly, "Mom, I'm scared of the day Samantha comes back." I smiled, gently. "Don't be afraid, son. Liars always fear the light. But we're already living in it." He took my hand, for the first time in years. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what else to say." I looked toward the children playing in the yard and replied, "Don't thank me. Thank these days and the ones that gave us a chance to make things right before it was too late." Inside my heart, I heard a voice, the voice of my late husband. "You're still the best teacher, Margaret, because you teach not just with chalk, but with a love that never fades." The day Samantha returned, the sky over Madison was gray. The wind carried the chill of the season's first storm, and the trees outside swayed as if sensing what was coming. I was brewing tea when a car stopped at the gate. Samantha stepped out, wearing a tight dress, dark sunglasses, and her phone pressed to her ear. She pushed the door open without knocking, her voice sharp as glass. "Hello, Mother. I'm here to pick up the kids. I hope you haven't taught them any of your old-fashioned tricks." I set the teacup down and looked straight into her eyes. "The kids are in the garden. They want to talk to you before they leave." She shrugged, smirking. "Fine. I'll tell them to pack up. I don't have time for emotional theatrics." Samantha walked into the yard. David was standing there with Ethan, Lily, and Noah. The children froze when they saw her. They didn't run to her like before. They just stood still, eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Hi, sweethearts," Samantha said brightly, her tone too cheerful to be real. "Let's go home." Ethan squeezed Lily's hand and whispered, "But our home is here now." Samantha stiffened, then gave a cold laugh. "So the old woman's brainwashed you already?" David spoke up. "That's enough, Samantha." His voice was calm, steady. "You don't need to pretend anymore." She spun around, eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" I stepped forward and placed an envelope on the table. Inside were printed copies of her messages with Eric. "This is what you left behind for this family. A plan, clever, but cheap." Samantha's face turned pale. She picked up the papers, skimmed them, then forced a laugh. "Ridiculous, fake. You believe your mother over your wife?" David said nothing. He only looked at her, and that look alone made Samantha take a step back. "I used to believe you," he said slowly, "so blindly that I couldn't see anything else. But now, you can't fool anyone anymore." She glanced around, desperate for an escape. "Kids, come here to Mommy. They're lying to you." But none of them moved. Lily stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mom, we heard everything. We saw your messages. You were going to leave us, weren't you?" Samantha's face froze. Tears welled up, but they were hollow, no longer convincing. "You don't understand, Lily. I just wanted a better life." Ethan interrupted. "Better? By hurting people?" David stepped closer, his tone gentle. "Samantha, if you truly want to change, you can start by admitting what you've done." She said nothing. The wind blew, scattering the papers across the yard. I picked one up and placed it back on the table. "You taught these children to fear," I said. "Now they've learned something else. Courage." Samantha looked around, at a family standing together, not angry, not shouting, only calm and resolute. She realized she had lost, not an argument, but the battle for trust. Just then the police officer and Mr. Lewis, the lawyer, stepped in. "Mrs. Harris," he nodded to me, then turned to Samantha. "We have a temporary order regarding property and custody. It would be best if you signed before things get more complicated." Samantha looked at the document, her lips trembling. Then, in silence, she signed. The pen hit the table with a faint clink, but that sound echoed in my heart like a final, full stop. She turned and walked away without looking back. Lily began to cry, Noah clung to my leg, and Ethan lowered his head. I knelt down, held all three of them, and whispered, "It's all right, my loves. Endings aren't always losses. Sometimes they're just how new beginnings are born." David came closer and wrapped his arms around us. In that moment, I felt warmth spreading through the house, the warmth of a family, finally reborn. 3 months after Samantha left, the house on Maple Street was utterly different. Not because of new paint or furniture, but because it was full of laughter. In the mornings, the scent of coffee mingled with the smell of apple pie drifted through the kitchen. David worked from home and often came out to help me water the plants. Ethan went to school early while Lily and Noah attended my little art class, Art and Heart by Grandma M, a place the whole neighborhood knew about. I never thought that at 67 I would begin a new career. But every time I watched those children coloring with joy, I saw clearly that a heart filled with love never truly grows old. Evelyn often stopped by with a basket of pastries and a cup of tea. "Margaret," she said one day, "you didn't just save your family. You made the whole neighborhood believe in kindness again." I only smiled. I never thought of myself as a hero, just a grandmother who couldn't stand still while her family fell apart. And David, he was no longer the weary man he once was. He began writing small reflections about his journey as a single father. To his surprise, thousands of people read them. One evening, he said, "Mom, I've realized that so many people out there are going through what I did. Maybe they just need someone to tell them that things can get better." I replied, "Sometimes healing begins with one person brave enough to speak the truth." The children, too, slowly reclaimed their lost childhoods. Ethan won an essay contest with a piece titled "The Hero Without a Cape," written about me. I laughed and cried as the principal read it, aloud to the class. Lily became the leader of her school's art club, and Noah learned to play the piano on his late grandfather's old instrument. Every time he played, I felt as though the past was smiling at me. One Saturday afternoon, while the family baked cookies in the yard, Ethan asked, "Grandma, if Mom came back, would you forgive her?" I paused for a few seconds, then said slowly, "Forgiveness isn't to make someone else feel at peace. It's to free yourself. I would forgive her, but I wouldn't forget." David took my hand. "I feel the same. Maybe one day she'll realize what she lost wasn't money. It was a real family." The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of freshly baked cinnamon cookies. I looked around, my 3 grandchildren laughing, my son at peace, lavender blooming in the garden, and I thought, this is life's valid reward, to live long enough to see love retake root. That night, I opened my old journal and wrote one final line. Final lesson. Family isn't the place where everything is perfect. It's the place where we still choose to love, even after seeing every flaw. Before ending my story, I turned to the camera and smiled. If you're still listening, maybe you believe what I do, that sometimes the people who seem to do nothing are the ones holding their whole world together. Cherish the elders in your family, and if you'd like to hear more true stories about kindness, forgiveness, and families finding their way back to love, please subscribe to this channel. Because here, every story reminds us of one simple truth: love and respect. Those are the fundamental foundations of family. Some days I sit by the window, watching sunlight filter through the old white curtains, listening to the children's laughter echoing from the yard. I still can't believe that this house, once so silent and cold, is now alive with warmth. I am no longer Margaret, the retired woman who does nothing. I am the keeper of the flame, the one who rekindled the light our family lost amid lies, pain, and silence. When I see my son teaching Noah to play the piano, Lily running across the garden, and Ethan reading his essay aloud, I finally understand something simple that all my years as a teacher never taught me through words. True love isn't in what we say. It's in what we do when someone else is hurting. I used to think old age was the time to rest, but it turns out it's the time to live again, to give, to heal, and to pass on what matters most, not just for ourselves, but for those we love. If you're still here, listening, maybe you, too, carry an unfinished story in your heart. Maybe you're a child who once misunderstood your parents. Perhaps you're a parent who has lost yourself in the grind of survival. Or maybe you're someone who's been told you're no longer useful. But I want you to remember this. No one is ever too old to be loved, and no one is ever too late to love again. Take a minute after this. Story ends. Call your parents, or simply tell someone that you're grateful for them, because sometimes that small act can save a home that's breaking somewhere. If this story of the Harris family warmed your heart, please click subscribe to help us share more real stories. Journeys where love triumphs over pain, where the elderly are not forgotten, and where everyone finds their worth again. Here, we believe that respect is not something we demand. It's something we cultivate through sincerity. Thank you for listening to the end. I am Margaret Harris, an ordinary grandmother with an extraordinary story. And I believe that sometimes the people who seem to do nothing, these are the very ones keeping this world standing.